Hi there. I'm Lisa Feldman Barrett. I'm a university distinguished professor of psychology at Northeastern University. I just presented a seminar hosted by the Institute for Experiential AI at Northeastern called Emotion AI: Separating Facts from Fiction. We had a lot of questions that there wasn't time to answer, so I'm going to answer some now. So stay tuned. Before I do, I want to let you know that the video of the talk is available on the Institute's website, and also a PDF of my slides are there. And I do just want to say one more thing for people who are tuning in. This research that I presented in my talk was a very, very small slice of a much larger body of research that goes back at least 40 years, showing that there aren't universal facial expressions of emotion. There aren't physiological signatures, one for each emotion category, and so on and so forth. And I would encourage you to check out that literature if you're interested in this topic. My talk yesterday flashed the face page of a couple of papers that are a really good starting point. Or you could just go to my book, How Emotions Are Made: The Secret Life of the Brain. This is not me hawking my book for you to buy it. You could get it at the library. That would be just as efficient for you. But there are a lot of references, and online there are web references, about 1,000 web references in relation to this topic.
All right, Lisa, thank you so much. My name is Liz Roderick. I'm the Associate Director of Events here at the Institute. We have received so many questions related to this seminar, and we have chosen a few to ask Lisa now. So we'll go ahead and get started. Lisa, the first question is Plutchik's wheel of emotion a useful model, or is there one that is more accepted?
So I would say two things about this. One is that Plutchik's model is pretty much a story that has as far as I know, no serious empirical evidence behind it. It's one of a variety of theories which suggests that there are universal categories of emotion. So I would say, no, I don't think Plutchik's model is accepted. I don't know, no serious affective scientist even talks about Plutchik's model. But more importantly, I would say the science of emotion is very divided between researchers who focus on the hypothesis that there are fixed universal categories of emotion around the world, each one with its own facial expression, its own physiological, pattern in the body, and its own brain pattern, and so on and so forth. And then other people, other researchers, other programs of research which attempt to observe and model structured variation in emotional responses. So actually looking at the variability, instead of trying to control it out, actually try to model it and find great variability across really instances of any single category, like anger, for example.
All right, thank you. The second question, humans can pick up on these cues readily. What's the difference between us picking up these cues versus AI?
So this is a really great question, because the deeper premise of the question here is, what's the difference between an algorithm, even a really sophisticated algorithm, and a human brain? And the answer is simply that a human brain, like when your brain is, looking at something, for example, your attention is focused on that thing, but actually what you're detecting is an entirely huge ensemble of signals. You have sensory surfaces all over your body for sights and sounds and smells and tastes and so on, but also inside your body. And that entire ensemble is what the brain is receiving and working with. So we're not talking about one signal, and we're not even talking about 5 signals here. We're talking about a huge ensemble of signals that the brain is using. and it's looking for patterns. It's constraining those signals actually in compressing them in interesting ways. So what I would say is that um, your subjective sense of what you pay attention to is a really small component of what your brain's actually processing. That's the first point. The second point is that some of the signals actually, like signals from breathing and from your heart rate and so on, actually the brain uses those to sample, to influence how it's sampling the outside world. So one of the big differences, another big difference between an AI and a brain is that a brain has a task that no AI has, and that is to manage a body. Your brain's most important job is to regulate your body. There are gazillions of systems it's trying to coordinate and regulate. So an AI to work like a brain doesn't have to have a body, but it does have to have energy constraints that it has to work in, and that it has to regulate many, 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 many systems in that under those constraints. So those are some of the differences that make a human brain, be able to do certain things faster and better than an AI. And also, it means that the human brain will do some things worse, actually.
As emojis increasingly shape communication in various apps, what do you predict their long-term impact will be on humanity, particularly concerning emotional subtlety?
Well, we actually published a paper on emojis because we were really interested to see whether are they unambiguous cues to anything? And the answer is they're not. They're just like, they're basically like little caricatures. And if you really, people are constantly adding detail to their emojis so that the emoji, that people, that they're not sending mistaken signals. So I think in general, what I would say is that humans are amazing meaning makers, and the flexibility with which we can take any signal and make more than one meaning out of it is a feature and also a bug. And what I mean by that is it lets us use generatively use symbols to communicate many things, but it also means we have to constantly provide context for each other or there'll be misunderstandings. I don't think that I never predict what any innovation is going to have for long term for humanity. I'm That's like way above my pay grade. I would never presume to know. But I think emojis, the way people are using them is the way they use every other symbol, which is you have to provide context or you'll be misunderstood. And all it takes is one or two times of being misunderstood and the consequences of that, for most people to learn that they have to provide context.
And how is AI advancing in these analyses?
So I think the question here is really, how is AI advancing emotional communication? And I think the answer is it isn't, as far as I can see. Doesn't mean that it can't, but anytime you're attempting to use stereotypes, even you've sort of enshrined stereotypes in your algorithms, you're not going to enhance communication. What you'll do is cause problems. And just like every other set of innovations, the problem here isn't the algorithms, it's the humans, the questions that humans are asking with those algorithms, right? Algorithms are really powerful and they can be used in really important ways to advance communication, but humans, no tool is bad or good. It's all in the questions and the tasks that people put that technology too. So I would say we just have to get smarter about asking better questions, which is what the main point of my talk was that I gave. Mm-hmm.
How should machine learning models be trained to become better and more valuable in their results and range when it comes to human communication or interpretation of behavior?
So I want to step back from that question and say, even before we answer the question of how should they be trained, we really should be asking what kind of data should we be collecting, and what should we be using? What data should we be using? So the science of emotion has largely been based on stereotypes. And the problem is that the stimuli themselves that are used are stereotypic. So people only scowl in anger about 35% of the time, which is more than chance, but that means 65% of the time they're doing something else that's really meaningful with their face. And we're never going to learn what that is, whether there are regularities there, whether there are different regularities for different people, or whether the situational constraints are so strong that maybe there are reliable expressions that people make in particular situations. But we'll never learn that if we don't start randomly sampling, like much broader sampling than we're doing now. So I think the first question, right, is what data should we be collecting? And should we be curating these, starting with our folk idea of Western view of anger, and then selecting instances? It doesn't matter whether you have 5 instances or 5 million instances from the internet, right? If you're using your own beliefs about what anger is in order to sample your stimuli, you're never going to discover anything other than your own beliefs. And that is something that philosophers call theory-laden evidence. Okay. So I think we have to sample differently and broadly. I have to think we have to sample individuals across situations in time, because it's possible that different people have different expressive vocabularies. And it's also possible that there are some similarities and some differences between people that maybe we could actually even characterize, right? So maybe even build a similarity space of expressive vocabularies for people, and then we could figure out what it is that makes people similar or different. But all of this requires a very, very different approach. Um, um, Even before you start thinking about how to train, whether you should be using, supervised or unsupervised. So what I would say is broadly sample many people deeply across many contexts, sample as many signals as you can, use something like representational learning, or something that is like a partially self-supervised or fully self-supervised learning where you're not using folk labels, because that's just never going to get you anywhere. And then I think you'll be onto something. I think you'll actually be able to discover something useful.
You mentioned we need a plethora of multimodal and context-dependent data to build more generalizable AI to predict emotions. Please share your thoughts on the ethical aspects of collecting such comprehensive data.
Yeah, so I think that's an interesting question. I think the ethics of collecting such data is no different than the ethics of ever collecting any data on anybody. Um, I'm a scientist. I don't work in industry. So we always get full consent from our subjects. And it's even possible to give people ownership of their own data so that they can decide when they want it used and when they don't. So for example, there are countries that um, that sample citizens, that citizens actually donate their data basically, but they always retain ownership of those data. So it's their choice, what data gets used and when it's used and for how long it's used. Now, I'll say that my husband is a computer scientist and he does a lot of work in the area of security. So I realize that what I'm saying is a bit optimistic, and that once you put something out there, data, you kind of lose control of it to some extent. But I know that there are countries that do this, and they actually cultivate citizen scientists who want to donate their data, and it's done in a way where people aren't routinely harmed. So I think that the answer here is, I'm not an ethicist, but I will tell you that asking people to donate their data to help solve a problem for humanity, like detecting depression early so people don't commit suicide, is a really different kind of a ask for someone than collecting their data because you want to sell them stuff, or you want to manipulate what they believe, or whatever, So I think that we should be 100% transparent with people. And in my experience, when you do that, they still, if it's for a cause they believe in, they'll still want to donate their data. And so, but I guess what I'm trying to say in my kind of awkward way here is that there are institutional changes or maybe policy changes that have to happen to make this possible on a broader scale and have people still be protected.
Dogs convey emotions in ways that many of us think we understand. Cats are more subtle, but some people think they can detect emotions in cats. Are these people fooling themselves?
Well, I would say the entire premise of your question is problematic. How do you know that dogs convey emotion? Actually, research suggests that we are making meaning of dogs' signals in exactly the way that we make meaning of each other's signals. So being mind blind to a cat just means that, you're not able to use the same kind of meaning making structure that you have for people that people use with their dogs, and they use with their cars, and they sometimes use with their, little kids use it with their blankets and their toys, that you're not using with your cat. And I that may sound like a kind of flippant response, but it's not meant to be. I think part of the lesson here is that we can't ask questions about emotion from a perspectiveless standpoint. You can't ask, is the dog angry, or is the cat, um, you know, um, contemptuous? You have to ask from a perspective. So you experience a dog as having emotions, and you experience a cat as not. But that doesn't mean that there really are emotions in the dog or in the cat. It's about your experience of them as emotional. That's really where the important question lies, I think. And by the way, I do have a dog, just so that you know. And I do think she loves me, even though I know from her perspective, I'm just a food machine, If I go with the she loves me because it makes me feel good, and I don't mind that little white lie.
All right, well, thank you for that. Do you think multimodality is a promising avenue to get at some rule-based procedure to reliably identifying some emotional state? Parentheses, I mean combining facial expressions with sound, language, gesture, etc.
I think that's the only way to do it. But I don't think that you're going to find like one pattern for anger that will even probabilistically work for most instances. I think that multimodality is one key element, but I think you also have to look ideographically, meaning you have to look within a person across situations, and you have to use signals from the situation also. And you have to ask, not presume. You have to ask, what are the reliable patterns in that person, and do they generalize? When do they generalize? Do they ever generalize? We've done this actually for physiological patterns, for multimodal physiological patterns, and we find that 33% of the reliable patterns that we identify in people are unique to that person, using unsupervised machine learning and all kinds of fancy technology.
All right, this next one is a long question. In language, while different individuals might understand some content the same, their own interpretation of the content is different. Parentheses, what they get out of it and how they interpret what they understood is based and is a complex function of prior experiences, biases, knowledge, mental state, etc. Do you think emotions in humans are similar in that the function is also very complex and cannot be a simple function of external physical features? If I'm not mistaken, that was part of your message. Am I correct?
That is exactly my message.
How do we shift existing false and sometimes manipulative emotion AI engines to this path of asking the right questions about emotions, detections, inferencing, and transforming?
The problem here is not with the algorithms, it's with the people who are asking the questions and programming the algorithms. So this research, I will say that, let me say it differently. The science of psychology is about 150 years old. And since psychology became a formal science, people have been arguing about the nature of emotion. Whether, whether there are types of emotion, like universal types, or whether there's all this structured variability, basically. And every 20 or 30 years, it looks like people are finally getting the message that these simple types don't exist, right? So in philosophy, you would call them natural kinds. These are emotion categories, natural kinds. I have to tell you that in science, natural kinds don't exist anywhere. Even chemical elements are not natural kinds, okay, in the periodic table. And they were considered to be like the quintessential natural kind, with an essence that behaves very, very routinely, very simply. It's not the case. But yet people still keep asking this question. So this problem that you're framing is not a problem for AI, it's a larger problem. And here's the way I see the problem now. Because, when I started my career, 30 something years ago, I didn't start out my career to be a curmudgeon or to be like I wasn't looking to like criticize everything, you know. But the thing that surprised me was that people were ignoring evidence. There was just this mountain of evidence that people were ignoring, and I couldn't figure out why. And then I realized at a certain point that it's not just now, it's been the entire time. I think that I stand up and I give a talk and I present really what is a small slice of evidence of a very large pie. And people still ask questions about, well, don't you think it's going to be possible to find one pattern for, of facial expression for, even if it's probabilistic, for anger or for sadness? So people keep asking the same question over and over and over again, no matter how sophisticated the models get, no matter how sophisticated the technology gets, there's always this hope. And so what that means is that there's a deeper issue here. People don't want to give up this view. And so that's really the question that we have to be asking. It's not so much about how do we get AI to shift. It's really, how come people don't want to give up this view no matter how much evidence there is? And from my perspective, when scientists, or anybody actually, but scientists in particular, and that includes anyone even who works in technology, in industry or whatever, when they're not responsive to data, they're practicing an ideology. They're not practicing science. And so that's what's happening here. And the question is why? And it's not as simple as, oh, people worry about their careers or whatever, because you know what? I'm a scientist. I've been wrong before. I can say it out loud. I know people who have too. It doesn't destroy your career. It's something more than that. And I have some ideas about what that is, but it's just really speculation. But I think that's what I'm trying to do here, is sort of adjust your question, because I think it's a really important question, but I think it's a much bigger and harder question. It's not just about AI. It's really about how come people don't want to give up this view of emotion despite just an overwhelming amount of evidence that it's wrong.
Where can we learn more about cultural specific emotions?
Yes. So there's a great book that was just published last year called Between Us by Batya Mesquita. And the whole book is about cultural variation in emotion. In my book, How Emotions Are Made, I have a chapter on culture, and I've got a bunch of websites that I list in the web notes for where people can go, and also papers where people can learn about the cultural variation, some of which is like totally fascinating.
Would an optimistic person's brain create different concept probabilities than a pessimistic person?
100% yes.
Speech recognition was stuck for many years. They were looking for acoustic invariance, but these days, deep nets are working pretty well. Why shouldn't we expect the same pattern for research on emotion classification?
Because the phenomenon is much more variable than speech. So when you hear a phoneme, the phoneme that sounds to you like the same in every single situation is not the same acoustically. And deep learning algorithms can deal with that. But the magnitude of variation is much greater for emotion than it is for a phoneme or even a set of phonemes. So again, we're talking about a phenomenon here that's just the magnitude of variation is considerably higher, and the number of signals that are relevant is considerably larger. So the complexity is greater. So I'm not saying that you won't ever find signatures. I'm saying if you do, they're going to be really specific to people in specific contexts. And then we can start to inductively learn where the generalizations are. But if you design your experiments assuming that those regularities are there, you'll always find them, and they just won't generalize to the real world.
Lisa, I want to thank you so much for taking the time today for the Institute for Experiential AI. We hope to have you back very soon. Thank you so much.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks so much.